Sometimes in music, it feels like everything is going exactly as planned, and other times it feels like you cannot write a decent melody or sound in weeks. So today I want to talk about creative workflow and the ways that I take advantage of any creative moments that I may have. And we're also going to look at what you can do to increase your creativity. So this is a project that I've been working on for the last few weeks. This is actually a collaboration with Subject Ultra, and he is now working on it, so for me the project is on hold. That is also why you can see everything is being named here. That is because I had to render out the stems and then send them to him. But I basically left him this project in an unfinished state, and you can see that if I scroll up with the way that the project is looking in the first part over here, basically from this point up until here, versus the last part over here. And the reason for that is because that is the way that I like to write my music. I like to write my music linearly and then put in as much of the elements as I know will fit in that part of the track, so that I get an idea of how the track is going to sound like when that track is actually finished at that particular moment. Of course, one of the things that I do like to do is layer out my structure first. So what you'll see is when I start the project, I make a kick and bass, I make some drums, I lay out the structure for that, and then I start writing out all of my ideas. But then usually what happens is either I start at the drop, or I already have an idea for an intro, or maybe sometimes I have an idea for a breakdown or something like that. But I usually start in the first part over here and then just linearly write my way to the end of the track. And the reason why this is important is because this is always the same kind of workflow. I know where I'm going to be working on the track whenever I open up a project because I know how my workflow works. Usually my project files, when I load them up at the beginning of a session, look like this, so I can immediately see what is happening in the project and where I would need to continue producing. And this is because of my second workflow thing is I like to forget projects between big sessions working on them. What that means is that I have multiple projects going on at the same time. Currently I have around 10 running projects. Some of these are in a stage where I either need to export them for mixing or finalize a couple of last details and then export them for mixing, while others are in the very early stages of writing. And this is again another kind of optimization of my own workflow in terms of creativity. If I have the creative energy to work on details of a track, I have a project for that. If I have the creative energy to start writing a track, I probably have an idea that I can start to write. If I have the creative energy to work on a production that is in its very early stages, I'll also have a project for that. Whatever I want to do at that moment, I have a project in which I can do that. And this also means that I can completely forget a project by just not working on it for a couple of months and then going back into it with a clean ear. That of course immediately allows me to reevaluate all of the ideas that I had at the time that I last worked on it. And this is usually the moments where the projects get the biggest upgrades, because this is when I become the most critical of my own work because it's very old. I've done a lot of new stuff in the time. I've of course continued to experiment with sound design ideas or arrangement ideas or things like that. And all of these things are new things that I can now start to implement in the production that I was working on a couple of months ago. Now you can imagine that this process is really nice because it allows you to take a track where you're saying like, oh, this is sounding like old me, and it allows you to bring it up to your standard, even though you just made it like 2 months ago. It is still the case that for me, I've learned a lot in those 2 months that I would like to implement. Maybe I've just also favored other types of sound design, other types of processes. Now, of course, since this is my full-time job, I usually do a little bit more music production than the average person in like a week, especially if you take into account all of the experimentation and sound design that I have to do for videos and such. But I do remember before I started doing YouTube, I didn't really have that. I was also just doing it on the side as a hobby, and I would constantly just work on one project from start to finish and finalize it and then move on to the next project. And in that case, you didn't really feel like you could make these big jumps in just upgrades of a production because all of the learning that you did when producing was happening in the production that you were actually working on. Like sometimes I would go back and listen to an old project, but then I really didn't finish them. I don't ever remember having a production, just leaving it for a couple of months and then continue working on it. Now, another way that I'm staying creative is I just listen to a lot of sidetracks. I listen to sidetracks basically anytime I'm listening to music. And I've always held the belief that everybody that is producing should probably listen to half an hour of other people's music before they actually go into their production sessions, and an hour of listening before you go into any mixing or mastering sessions. Now, this has more to do with tuning your ears and such to what you are actually trying to produce. And I think that that's much more effective than having a reference track up in here. You can see I have a spot for a reference track. I can use that, but I never really use other people's music in the project when I'm actually producing. I just listen to it before I actually start my production. And of course, I like to do that on the same system that I'm producing on, but also in between, I just like to listen to sidetracks whenever I'm out, whenever I'm maybe going for a walk outside or something like that, or when I'm going grocery shopping. And you can imagine that that is also a great way to keep up with other people's music, get new ideas for your music. and overall just staying more creative. Now, as you can tell, a lot of this has been about just like workflow and that kind of stuff. And that is really important because staying organized allows you to build a framework in which creative things can happen. This is also the reason why I spent relatively little time if you compare to other Sidetrance producers starting off my project with a kick and bass, so that I have more time focusing on the things that actually matters, which are stuff like the sequences that really gives your track its own unique identity. And either way, I like to adapt the kick and bass to the rest of the production as opposed to the other way around, which means that I need to write out the rest of the production before I actually settle on my final kick and bass. Now, one of the things that I've done that allows me to do this is build up a framework like this with presets and wavetables that I can just use to find new tonalities for my bassline. In this case, this is just a preset from Psychedelic Essences Volume 3. So this bassline maybe took me 10 seconds to set up the patch and then write in the MIDI, and that's it. Maybe the kick took a little bit longer. Let's say that the kick took 2 minutes to make. That means that in 3 minutes maybe, I've made my kick and bass and then I'm moving on to other parts of the track. So that organization is really, really important because it allows you to skip all of the things that aren't really creative for you. And it allows you to focus on the things that are creative for you, which is mainly the sounds and the synths that you're going to put on top of your kick and bass. The same is kind of true for drums in the sense that your drum samples, your open hat, your snare, and your closed hat, those things are probably going to sound a certain way. So there's not a lot of creativity in there. Maybe there's a little bit, maybe you can experiment a little bit. But even those kind of things I like to do when I have my basses set up. So I'll start off with a normal open hat, a normal snare, and a normal closed hat. And then if I want to experiment with it a little bit more, I'll end up doing that after I've kind of set up my template production, if you want to call it something like that. Now, the reason why I wouldn't want to call it exactly like that is because I do make everything from scratch every time I start a production. I don't import maybe a kick from one project and a bass line from another project. I don't like working that way. That feels a little bit too restrictive for me because then you end up getting the same kick and bass sound over and over again at the end of the day. So to me, the more important thing is being able to get that initial stuff that you just need to do out of the way quickly, as opposed to re-importing it from other projects or something like that. Now, there's other factors involved in creativity as well. There's a whole bunch of outside factors, of course. I don't really need to talk about things like having your life in order and not being stressed out and stuff like that. Also, I don't think that I'm the best person to talk about that because I'm not a psychologist. I cannot really give you advice in those kind of areas other than to say it is really, really important, and it's going to depend on person from person what that means in actual practice. I also don't think that I really have to talk about that. I think that it's pretty obvious that like feeling good in real life is a good thing in terms of creativity. For example, once you get back from a festival, you're usually a little bit more creative. Also because you have heard a whole bunch of music and maybe a whole bunch of new ideas that you want to implement. But generally speaking, also because festivals make you happy and they let you forget about some of the things that you have going on in your life. So overall, I think that it's about everything that I wanted to talk about. Let me know if I've missed something by leaving a comment down below. Or if you have another topic that you want me to talk about, you can leave a comment for that as well. But that's going to be the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know by leaving a like and make sure that you're subscribed. Another way to support the channel is by checking out some more of my content. So I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.